On the morning of August 28, 2018, Billy Ray Kane, an on-duty employee of RRH Trucking, driving a heavy commercial RRH truck, crashed into Justin Miller's small Toyota SUV in Austin, Texas, causing a chain reaction and knocking Justin unconscious. Justin was rushed to the hospital where he was treated and diagnosed with severe traumatic brain injury, and today, over 3 years later, he still struggles with the effects of traumatic brain injury. The RRH Trucking employee, Billy Ray Kane, who initially caused this horrific accident, has admitted in sworn deposition that the accident was 100% his fault. The employer, RRH Trucking, clearly admitted that Justin Miller had no responsibility in this crash, and therefore, by law, imputed liability against RRH Trucking was clearly admitted. One of the reasons RRH Trucking is liable is because they had no safety policies in place. Now, you might ask yourself, why should a company be responsible for the acts of a single employee? Well, the answer is firmly based in historical legal tradition. In fact, going all the way back to the Roman Empire, where servants and slaves acted on behalf of a master, it became apparent that slaves and servants lacked the resources and assets to compensate those they hurt. In addition, masters had control over their servants and could discourage negligence if they wanted to. Since masters exercised such control, ancient law recognized that the best way to avoid accidents was to require masters at their peril to ensure the careful execution of their servants' duties. It is known as the master-servant rule. Finally, if the law never holds masters responsible for the conduct of those they order around, this creates a system by which wealthy masters could get away with anything by forcing their servants or slaves to do their dirty work and then simply claim that they did not sanction such lawlessness. In short, holding masters accountable for the carelessness and or the criminality of their servants is the only feasible way forward. In modern times, there are no longer slaves beholden to masters, but in terms of the common law, there's no difference between one's voluntary employment and servitude. Consequently, if an employee injures someone through negligence, the court simply says respondeat superior, which means let the master answer. There is a limit to this concept, however. The law does not hold employers accountable for anything and everything their employees do, just their foreseeable acts of carelessness. Since everything an employee does is to benefit the employer, there's a high burden on the employer to provide a safe work environment where the worker may do the employer's bidding, and everything that can feasibly be done to create a safe work environment is expected to be done. This even applies to a scenario where the injured worker was also negligent in their conduct. Under Texas law, if the non-subscriber employer is negligent, even in the slightest, then the worker has a right to sue them. In this Insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Justin Miller's Story, our news team is on location in Austin, Texas, meeting with Todd Kelly, partner at the Carlson Law Firm, who represents Justin Miller and his family, and Dr. Huma Haider, founder of the National Brain Injury Institute, one of America's leading traumatic brain injury experts, to discuss the specific challenges and strategies to prove this case, as well as to show how traumatic brain injuries are identified, diagnosed, and assessed. Todd has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Texas. Todd has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. And his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Austin, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Todd Kelly to the show. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your firm.
I'm a board-certified trial lawyer. I have been practicing law for about 25 years, a little over. I work at the Carlson Law Firm. I manage the North Austin office of the Carlson Law Firm. We are predominantly a personal injury trial firm. We represent everything from car wrecks to sexual assault, human trafficking cases, and we have a few lawyers that actually do some mass tort cases. So we kind of run the gamut of personal injury. We have 14 offices in and around Texas, with one in Los Angeles, actually.
Todd, tell our audience a little bit about your client, Justin Miller, please.
Justin is a man who was actually driving to work on I-35, just the road that's been creating some background noise for us here today. Early morning, rush hour traffic, was sitting in stopped traffic where he was rear-ended by a commercial vehicle by a man by the name of Billy Ray Kane, driving for RRH Trucking, who we believe to have been talking on his cell phone or texting on his cell phone at the time.
And he was severely injured, correct?
He was. It wasn't immediately noted, but he did ultimately receive a diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury as a result of what they call the coup-contra-coup forces that occur inside the brain when the head is tossed back and forth.
Right, and later on we're going to have a traumatic brain injury expert on the show, Dr. Huma Haider. We'll bring on her in a minute. But let's talk about some of the legal strategies you have here. You've got the driver, Billy Ray Kane, admitting that he is 100% responsible. And as we're talking, we're showing the clip of the video deposition.
It states that I thought I got hit from behind, but I'm pretty sure I was just dazed and confused.
Okay. You no longer believe that as of here today?
No, I'm taking full responsibility for the fact that I rear-ended him.
You also have his employer, which is RRH Trucking, correct? Also admitting the fact, more or less, that they're 100% responsible too. Now, there's a legal term for that, isn't that?
It's respondeat superior, but there's, in addition to the respondeat superior claim with respect to RRH Trucking, they have some direct negligence. And they did some pretty shady things just in the process of hiring in this case. One of the things that I was a little blown away about and we didn't expect when we took Billy Ray Kane's deposition was that he said, I didn't fill out that employment application. I didn't fill it out at all. And so we dug a little deeper and we said, well, isn't this you? And he says, well, yeah, but it doesn't have the junior on my name. Oh, well, okay. But that's still you, and that's your phone number. And he says, yeah, that's my phone number. And this reference here, that's your mother-in-law, right? He goes, no, I've never heard of that woman before. Okay, red flags are going off. Well, how is this woman on your employment application if you never heard before? He didn't know. He couldn't answer that. What was even more telling is when we looked at the prior employers for Billy Ray Kane that were listed on his employment application that was provided to us by RRH Trucking, Billy Ray Kane, there were two, and Billy Ray Kane told us in no uncertain terms that he had never heard of either company. And when we asked him, well, you signed it, right? You signed this employment application. He looked at it and he said, no, that's not my signature. And one of the important telling things, I think, from my perspective is when he was asked, he says, how certain are you that that's not your signature? And he said, well, I bet my mother's life on it. Now, in Texas, that means you're real doggone sure.
So that's telling. Now, faced with all this evidence, this case is still in litigation, isn't it?
Amazingly, yes.
Where's it going forward?
My guess is that with the COVID shutdown of the courts, there's been a delay. The natural mantra of the defense is delay, deny, and defend. And so they've been able to delay as a result of this. Ultimately, I think this case is indefensible. I think that the behavior of this trucking company is just absolutely gross. And when confronted with the traumatic brain injury that my client suffered, the owner of RRH chuckled. He actually looked back and kind of scoffed and laughed about the injury, which is surprising when you consider that their truck was totaled and their own driver was diagnosed with a concussion, which by definition is a form of mild traumatic brain injury.
Now, this is a case where if it goes to trial, the jury verdict might exceed any insurance that R&RH has or had, correct?
We expect that it will. The economic damages alone exceed the $1 million policy that RRH had. In Texas, we have a doctrine which is put forth in what we call the Stowers. It was a Stowers case, and we have to give the insurance company an opportunity to settle the case within the policy. Well, we've given them that, and now what they've done is they've put their insured at risk, and I think significant risk of an excess jury verdict.
So it could exceed the actual insurance policy.
Yes, I would expect that it would.
We also are very fortunate today to have one of the leading traumatic brain injury experts in the country, Dr. Huma Haider. Your firm has consulted with her and her institute a number of times. So let's bring her on right now so she can talk about traumatic brain injuries. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Huma Haider to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell our audience a little bit about your institute that you have in Houston, and I understand you have 6 offices around the country. What is it called and what do you do?
My medical practice is called National Brain Injury Institute. I started that about 3 years ago. We started from Houston, but now we have offices in Dallas, San Antonio, Los Angeles, Orlando, and Phoenix. At National Brain Injury Institute, our goal and our focus is to diagnose and provide the appropriate treatment and rehabilitative care that these patients who suffer from mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injury, they need and they deserve that care and treatment.
When you have patients that are referred to you, that come into your office, what are the steps that you take to determine whether someone actually has traumatic brain injury?
When a patient suffers from a traumatic brain injury, they go through, some patients will recover in the first 3 months, but after 3 months, if the patient continues to have physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, and behavioral symptoms, then the likelihood of these symptoms becoming chronic is very high. And these patients require appropriate diagnosis and treatment to stabilize their symptoms, to treat their symptoms, to make their symptoms prevent them from getting worse moving forward. So when the patients come to National Brain Injury Institute, we are performing comprehensive neurological evaluations for these patients. And then we are coming up with a treatment plan and the diagnostic studies or the rehabilitative care that the patient needs. So the treatment plan consists of treatment of the symptoms that the patient is suffering from. For example, 95% of the patients with traumatic brain injury will suffer from post-traumatic headaches. So the first thing that we do is we start them on pharmacological treatment. What it is we will prescribe them medications to prevent the headaches, to abort these headaches, or to use some medications as needed. Now, if the pharmacological treatment doesn't work, then we go to the next step. The next step involves giving them some injections that are related to the treatment of post-traumatic headaches. Those injections include Botox injections, greater occipital nerve block injections, lesser occipital nerve block injections. If those injections don't work, then we go to the next step. Then we are using some non-invasive neuromodulation devices, which are very helpful in controlling the symptoms of the patient. Now, if those non-invasive neuromodulation devices, they also do not provide adequate relief for the patient's symptoms, then we go to the next step, which is surgical step where we can do occipital nerve decompression or some other minimally invasive procedures to provide relief to the patient. So that is one symptom that we are giving them treatment of. Now, another common symptom that these patients suffer from cognitive deficits. For example, they're going to have deficits of short-term memory. They're going to have deficits of long-term memory. They're going to have attention deficits. So what we are doing is that we are first performing comprehensive evaluation of their deficits. And based on the information that we are getting, then we are coming up with the targeted treatment plan for the patient. For example, if they are showing major deficits in memory, then we're going to provide them rehabilitative care in the memory domain. For example, if they're having major deficits in attention area, then we're going to provide them targeted treatment and give them exercises where it's going to help improve their attention span. Now, if they're having major deficits in executive functioning or their judgment area, then we're going to provide them treatment that will help improve and strengthen those functions of the brain. And now let's go on to the third aspect of traumatic brain injury, which is behavioral symptoms. Many patients will suffer from depression, anxiety, irritability, fatigue, mood swings. So we perform assessments, comprehensive, to diagnose their mood disorders, and then we're going to provide them targeted treatment for those mood disorders as well. And those treatments include pharmacological treatment, such as prescribing them medication, but a big part of it is combining the pharmacological treatment with therapy, such as a psychotherapy, such as a counselor who could meet with these patients, who could on a weekly basis or a twice weekly basis and go over the challenges, difficulties, or the symptoms that they are experiencing and provide them the tools that will help them through their journey after their traumatic brain injury.
These counselors, these therapists, are they at your institute too?
Yes, we do have a full-time licensed professional counselors who provide psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization therapy. They also provide cognitive rehabilitation therapies as well. We also have psychologists on staff who also participate in providing the therapies and neurocognitive rehabilitation.
Right. I also want to clarify one thing. Sometimes when you have a traumatic brain injury, the symptoms do not exhibit themselves right away. It could be not just weeks or months, it could be years later, correct?
Yes, many patients, I would say hundreds of patients that I have seen, they have been suffering from the symptoms of traumatic brain injury. As you know, I keep on elaborating that they can have physical symptoms, they can have cognitive symptoms, they can have behavioral symptoms, and these patients have been experiencing those symptoms for months and years, but they were unidentified. They have gone through many different doctors. They go through chiropractors, they go to pain doctors, they go through primary care physicians, they go through orthopedic doctors, but the cluster of the symptoms that these patients experience, nobody is asking them about those symptoms. And if they're not being asked about those symptoms, then patients, they do not volunteer that information because they themselves are not able to connect all the dots together that the symptoms that I'm experiencing are because of the traumatic brain injury. And that leads us back to the fact that traumatic brain injury is undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, and untreated. Many medical providers are not aware of that. Many medical providers are not trained to do that, and many medical providers are not putting forth the time and effort to identify and diagnose traumatic brain injury. As a result, patients go undiagnosed and untreated for years. I have seen patients who come to me 4 or 5 years later, and during the entire 4 or 5 years, they have been struggling, they have been disabled, they have been in pain, but as I said, they were unfortunate to suffer with these symptoms for such a long time.
And Todd, you know this in trying many of these cases, that one of the ways you're able to compare the before and the after, right, is by interviewing some people who are close to them, their wives, their former coworkers.
Coworkers are really key because a lot of times the coworker will say there's just been a dramatic change in this person. Often promotions that were expected don't happen. Sometimes people actually lose their jobs. But it would be axiomatic that a person with a brain injury doesn't know they have a brain injury a lot of the time. It's the very tool that they would use to determine whether or not the brain is injured is the brain, and it's injured, so they can't really get there. But other people observing them is really the key. And when you talk about these changes, and some of them are really dramatic.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You had a lot of insight, because I see, as you have mentioned, Todd, I see that, it's almost impossible sometimes for the individual who's been injured to be able to relate to what they used to do and what they're not able to do today, correct?
That is correct. And as Todd mentioned, it is very helpful to get this information or ask this from the family members, which we do on a routine basis, and they would come because the patients who are coming to us, they have brain injury, they are having memory problem, they themselves don't remember the entire extent of their injury, entire extent of their damage. But people who are around them, who are with them on a day-to-day basis, who are observing them, they are able to give us so much information about their change in personality that that they have become a completely different person. They are arguing all the time. They're irritable all the time. They have a short fuse now. And many of the patients with traumatic brain injury, they are prone to becoming a homeless person because they lose their jobs. They're not able to perform well at their work. They're not able to keep up with the routine. They're not able to keep up with the schedule. They are also prone to going to prisons because they suffer from these mood and behavioral disturbances, which can lead them into difficulties with the law. Suicide is another a very common area where traumatic brain injury patients are becoming prone to. They can become suicidal and they can commit suicide. So this is a national epidemic which is unrecognized, and as a result, many of the patients are suffering on a daily basis.
Again, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You've added a lot of insight.
Thank you very much.
Anything else in this case you want to talk about that is really expert advice to everybody out there who is a victim of a crash, and maybe that company that caused the crash goes out of business?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to consult with an attorney, consult with somebody who understands how these things work, because even if the company goes out of business, there is frequently insurance that is in place to take care of injuries, and frequently that insurance will be defended by a quality defense lawyer, and so you're going to want somebody to represent your interests, and particularly in these somewhat high-risk cases, they will spare no expense to defend themselves from what they owe you. And so you need to take them on in that same vein.
In the jury instructions in a case like this, like if you ever go to trial, right, will the judge instruct the jury something to the following, that this case could have been paid out or resolved earlier, but the defendant's law firm decided against that, and the defendant's law firm would be the law firm representing the insurance companies, so therefore this is the law?
The word insurance is impermissible in most circumstances, and so in fact you can get a mistrial if you bring it up in most circumstances. So the judge will never instruct a Texas jury that insurance should have paid or could have paid, and additionally, under our Rule 408, we don't discuss, 409, we don't discuss settlement negotiations, and we're not permitted to discuss settlement negotiations in front of the jury.
How does a jury assign additional damages to a verdict based on the fact that it's a bad faith case?
It's a little complicated. The first jury doesn't do it. What happens is the jury just awards the amount of damages that they think that the plaintiff is entitled to. If that amount exceeds the amount of insurance, then the actual defendant owns that bad faith claim. It's the actual defendant that assigns that bad faith claim over to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's attorneys in exchange for us saying we will no longer come after your personal assets if you allow us to go after your insurance company for the bad faith claim. And that's typically how that, and then it's a second lawsuit altogether to prove the bad faith and the fact that the insurance company should have paid when they had that chance.
And you've done a lot of those.
I've made that claim a lot. I don't know that anyone in Texas that's still practicing law has actually tried one. It hasn't actually been tried.
Because they settle.
Right. The risk is high.
Well, it's a good leverage point. Well, we wish you a lot of luck with this. We hope this settles the case. And thank you for being on the show.
Steve, appreciate your help.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.